The oil in the lantern had nearly vanished before the realization struck me that the darkness would offer no reprieve. Beyond the glass, the night retained its pitch-black color, though the restless movements of the first rooster in the coop signaled the approaching dawn. On the floor lay my prayer cap, having tumbled there hours before. My husband remained wide awake next to me, and a solitary, chilling conviction crystallized within my exhausted mind. The dawn was arriving, and he had not relented. Before uncovering the reality of that night and the lessons it imparted regarding the entitlements Amish husbands believe they possess, it helps to understand the perspective of the one sharing this account. I spent my formative years within an Old Order Amish church district nestled in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, eventually departing from that life a few years ago to openly discuss the realities I was conditioned to carry to my grave. If you seek an authentic account of plain life rather than an idealized tourist narrative, consider reflecting on these experiences, and consider this question. Did you ever believe an Amish wife possessed the right to say no? Hearing the diverse perspectives of others on this matter reveals just how deeply misunderstood these dynamics truly are. Marriage came early by modern standards, as I was only 18 when I wed Amos, a timeline that felt almost delayed within a community where most girls are promised by 17. Formal schooling concluded for me after the 8th grade, transitioning my education entirely to domestic duties like kitchen management, gardening, childcare, and needlework. By 16, attendance at Sunday evening singings marked the beginning of a subtle, unspoken courtship process, where a boy offering a buggy ride home or making regular Sunday night visits quickly led the congregation to view a couple as practically married. Yet, outsiders rarely grasped that absolutely no one prepared me for what marriage demanded physically. Neither my mother, my older sisters, nor any married woman in the district offered insight. We were fully capable of preparing a feast for 100 guests, preserving a winter's worth of produce, or assisting a livestock birth in freezing temperatures, yet we remained entirely uneducated about the wedding night. Instead, our sole preparation was encapsulated by the concept of ghorome, or total obedience. This singular directive of wifely submission formed the entirety of our guidance, carrying an unmentioned weight that could never be spoken of plainly due to strict rules against immodesty, which was viewed as a severe transgression. The theological structure of this world, which required years of external perspective to fully comprehend, dictated that marriage hinges entirely on headship. A husband holds absolute authority over his wife, mirroring the bishop's rule over the congregation, an authority granted automatically through wedding vows rather than earned. A wife's sacred duty is to yield completely, without consideration for her personal readiness, as hesitation is viewed as hochmut, the dangerous sin of pride. Consequently, when the bishop preached about a wife's submission during our ceremony, every woman present expressed silent agreement, yet none offered a warning of what that submission entailed once the bedroom door was shut. Our wedding took place on a late November Thursday following the harvest, beginning with a 4-morning awakening to prepare a feast for nearly 250 guests who filled the home and barn. The grueling 4-hour service combined preaching, the slow, wordless singing from the ausbund, and the exchange of vows before the bishop, followed by a heavy meal of roast chicken, stuffing, gravy, and sweet choufle pie. Amidst the socializing and aching smiles shared with relatives, a heavy dread lingered in my stomach because despite knowing how to manage a massive banquet, I was utterly ignorant of what would occur once the guests departed. When the house finally grew still, we retreated upstairs to a simple room containing a wooden bed crafted by my father-in-law, a handmade quilt from my aunts, a water basin, no mirror, and no lock on the door, as privacy in an Amish home implies a lack of trust. To be precise, Amos was not an inherently malicious individual. He was merely a 21-year-old capable of flawlessly plowing fields and shoeing horses in the dark, raised under the exact mirror image of my own conditioning. While I was taught to yield, he was instructed to lead with the absolute certainty that a devout wife would never deny him, leaving him entirely unaware of the potential harm embedded in that entitlement. That night, he operated under the belief that he was taking what was rightfully his, a belief supported by every rule of our upbringing. Though specific restrictions prevent a detailed description of the physical reality, the emotional architecture was devastating. I had naively assumed the wedding night involved a single encounter followed by rest, but as I lay there believing my duty was complete, I realized he intended to claim the entire night for himself, causing my consciousness to drift far away. Throughout those grueling hours, I watched the sky transition from the deep black of midnight to the profound blue of 4 in the morning, listening to the horses stir below and the steady ticking of my grandmother's clock. I desperately anticipated the sunrise, rationalizing that the dawn would finally demand his presence in the barn for the morning milkings, which served as the only remaining reprieve. Without a single word addressing my profound fatigue or inquiring about my well-being, he simply got out of bed when the rooster crowed, adjusted his suspenders, and went to tend to the livestock as if nothing unusual had occurred. Left alone in the graying light, I found myself too drained for tears, simply staring at the ceiling with the realization that the girl who entered that room the night before had been replaced by someone else entirely. That morning demanded that I resume my duties, washing my face, adjusting my prayer cap, securing my apron, and lighting the kitchen stove to prepare breakfast for the man who had kept me awake all night. The remaining guests ate their breakfast without a single inkling of my internal state, as such inquiries simply do not exist in a culture defined by total silence. For a long time, I internalized that experience, convincing myself that my exhaustion resulted from personal weakness, pride, or a failure to submit with a joyful heart. This is the true power of such conditioning. It dictates not only your experiences, but also how you are allowed to emotionally process them, framing your suffering as a spiritual failure within a completely sealed system. Years later, while shelling peas on a porch with my friend Rebecca, who had married a year before me, she quietly confessed that she spent the first 2 years of her marriage believing she was fundamentally broken because she dreaded the nighttime, assuming a proper wife should feel only appreciation. Realizing that every married woman I knew might be harboring the exact same silent burden, each believing she was entirely alone, revealed the bitter efficacy of this control, which required no locks or barriers, only a cycle of silence passed down through generations. Departing that world at 23 brought immediate consequences through Meidung, resulting in total shunning, unreturned letters, and absolute estrangement from my parents, who viewed my departure as a literal death. It was only through subsequent counseling in the outside world that I encountered concepts like autonomy and consent, allowing me to frame my past using a completely foreign vocabulary. When my counselor remarked that a partner's belief in an entitlement does not create an actual debt, the revelation caused my hands to tremble, realizing that what I had been taught to view as sacred obedience possessed a vastly different definition. She noted that the most severe confinement is one where individuals are convinced they constructed the cage themselves out of personal sinfulness. This perspective is not shared to incite animosity toward the culture that raised me, as the Amish community provides genuine virtues, including absolute solidarity during crises, a profound work ethic, and a foundation of faith that can eventually be reconstructed on one's own terms. Amos was simply a product of his environment, a young man handed a doctrine of ownership without ever being taught to question it. We were merely children playing the roles of adults in an institution we lacked the capacity to comprehend. Ultimately, no theology can sanitize exhaustion, no scripture transforms a terrifying night into a divine act, and no religious decree strips a woman of ownership over her own body. Obedience in that context was not an expression of affection, it was simply an exercise of systemic entitlement over an unguided, terrified young woman. To anyone who has existed in a space where compliance was mislabeled as devotion, or who has lain awake in the darkness believing they lacked the right to refuse, your exhaustion was valid, and your body remained your own. Such experiences do not indicate weakness or pride, but rather the reality of a duty imposed while being starved of the knowledge required for liberation. If you have never heard it before, recognize this fundamental truth. Your physical self belongs entirely to you, as it always has, even during the moments you were told otherwise. Value your autonomy deeply, for it is the very thing that sustains us.